That again. Okay, you can hear me now. Yeah, so as I was saying, I used to work in the assembly rooms on George Street in the festival, and I always thought it'd be cool to do a stand-up show. And this is probably the closest I'm ever going to get to doing it. So if I make a joke today, just laugh, even if it's not funny. So it'll just be a really nice thing for me. So I wanted to start by thinking about the creative process. And you've probably seen the diagram that's doing the rounds on the internet of this kind of U-shaped dip and rise that you go through, that creative roller coaster. You start a project and you think it's awesome, and then you get a bit further into it and it gets a bit tricky and it gets harder, and you hit this kind of pit in the middle of a project where you're thinking, fuck, this is quite hard. And then you start working through the problems and you find a solution and it gets better, and suddenly you're back at the awesome stage again. And you get this U-shape, and you keep riding this creative roller coaster again and again. And it's scary, but you know that you're going to come off for the end of it with a big smile on your face, so you keep doing it. But the question I want to ask today is, what happens when that roller coaster starts making you sick and you stop loving your job? Or even harder still, what happens when you stop loving yourself? So because the theme for today is taboo, I want to start with some confessions. And it's kind of ironic that this talk that I'm going to give about dealing with stress and looking after yourself has made me really stressed out. I had this grand vision for this year. I've just moved back from London to Scotland, and it was kind of a lifestyle change and about improving my quality of life and doing things a bit slower and having more time to myself. But actually, I've ended up probably having the busiest phase ever as a freelancer. I've got 3-4 projects on the go. I'm subcontracting another designer for the first time, and it's really, really stressful right now. So there I was last weekend trying to write this talk about dealing with stress and actually getting stressed about the fact that I was stressed about it. So that's my first confession. And that's actually the reason I don't have slides today, because I wanted to just concentrate on getting the talk done. So there's not going to be any photos of me experiencing extreme emotions. There's no platitudes centered in big type on a slide. There's no gratuitous cat photos. And I did this clever little thing with the CreativeMorning logo where I put a U after the O, so it was mornings, as in the sad thing you do at funerals. None of that's in my talk. But if you go to greig.cc CreativeMornings, you can see all that stuff, because I thought you might want some cat photos or, that kind of stuff. So those are my confessions. I want to start by telling you a story about what was probably the worst year of my life. About 5 years ago, I was working at a studio down in London, and it was up on the first floor of this really nice building near Borough Market. And I started getting panic attacks on my lunch breaks, and I would be stood at the bottom of the stair looking back up to my desk and thinking, shit, I don't actually want to go back to work. But I ignored that feeling, and those panic attacks kept happening, and they kept getting worse and worse. But I'm a guy, so I didn't talk about this stuff with anyone, and I just hoped it would go away. And obviously it didn't. And it got so bad that one day I just physically couldn't go to work. And I got off the bus on the wrong side of the River Thames and just wandered around London in a kind of daze, wondering what I'd done with my life. And I went to see my doctor because I couldn't work, and he said I was depressed and offered me medication, which I said no to. And I had to spend 2 weeks just taking time out. And that was a really, really tough 2 weeks. And I don't think I've ever cried so much in my life. And that feeling of depression is so hard to put into words. But I kind of feel like it's like a silent scream inside you that's eating you up. And it's just nibbling away bits and pieces of you. And then suddenly there's a huge chunk of you missing. But by that point, it's too late to do something about it. So my fix was to start doing therapy. And obviously that was quite a scary prospect. I'm quite a deeply personal person and quite shy as well. So the thought of sharing this stuff with another person was really intimidating. But what I realized was that it wasn't just my work that was making me unhappy. It was a whole plethora of other stuff and my relationships. And, this stuff is complicated. Human beings are complicated. And I also started doing group therapy at this point, which was like next level scary. But I'm so glad I did it, because what I realized is that all that stuff you think about, those funny thoughts you have, everyone else is thinking that stuff too. It's just no one ever talks about it. So to be sat in a room with other people and hearing them opening up like that was a huge eye-opener for me. So this was what I've called the worst year of my life. I also ran out of money and had to move home with my parents, which was never part of my game plan in my late 20s. And it was tough. But what I've realized looking back is that this year, whilst it was, this really painful period of depression, was also in a way one of the best years of my life. And it's taken me a long time to get that perspective, but I started this chain of things in motion helped by the depression. And this was inspired by a guy called Bill Cunningham. There's a documentary about him, Bill Cunningham, New York. He was in his 80s, cycling around the city on a bicycle and taking street fashion photos for the New York Times. And watching this film inspired me to start taking photos again myself, because I figured if this guy can do it in his 80s, there's no excuse for me not to do it. So I was into cycling at this point in London, so I decided to shoot people with their bikes. And I think the first person I took a photo of was a guy with a didgeridoo strapped onto his bike. So I clocked him. I was like, yes, this is the one. But then, because I'm shy, I didn't know what to do, so I just watched him disappear into the distance. And by the time he got about 100 meters, I was like, okay, I'm going to go get him. So I ran after him, and I took this photo. And I realized I really enjoyed this process of taking portraits of people. And I decided to turn that into a thing, and I called it Cycle Love. And it became a blog where I started writing about bike culture in London. And something funny happened, which was this got really popular. And I think up to then, my design work, I like to think I'm a good designer, but I never really got much coverage or press. I was kind of under the radar. And I think that was part of my problem, was that the work I was doing, especially as a digital designer, was very temporary. You make a website, but 2 or 3 years later, it's gone and there's nothing left of it. And I think that probably contributed to my depression in a way, because I felt like I wasn't leaving anything behind of value. So Cycle Love was my first chance at building something for myself. And in that same year, it kind of started to get some traction. And it was featured in Design Week. I did a talk at the V&A. The BBC even asked me to talk on the radio during the Olympics about cycling, which I said no to, because I have no clue about professional cycling. But it was kind of amazing to me how quickly that change happened. And it was kind of like my behavior had started to shift, and that the depression had become a trigger and a way for me to explore a new side of my personality. If you're interested in that idea of changing your behavior or changing your mindset, there's a really great book called Liminal Thinking by Greig. And he talks about the belief system that we all carry around inside our head. And it's basically a mental model that you use to make sense of the world. And what he says is that by kind of the way that the brain operates, we have to reduce this way of thinking, this mental model, down to a really narrow view of the world. Otherwise, it's just too much for us to take in. But what happens is everyone forms their own belief system and their own viewpoint. And what you have to remember is that the way you see the world might make sense to you, but to someone else on the other side of the spectrum, it might seem like you're the crazy one. And that's because everyone has got this narrow viewpoint. So what he encourages you to do is try and think about the opposite way of approaching anything. So I think that was, for me, that was something that happened by accident. And my depression kind of brought this change about, where I started to question my shyness. And I'm really grateful to depression, thank you, for kind of giving me that opportunity, because I wouldn't be here on the stage today if that hadn't happened. So I want to say to you is, if any of this is sounding familiar, if you're kind of feeling a bit burnt out with your work, or you're wondering, am I in a kind of depressed state, is that know that you're not alone. and that stuff will get better over time, however painful it is in the moment. And I can guarantee you that other people are thinking the same things because they write and tell me about it. I've become a kind of accidental agony aunt for graphic designers. Alongside Psycholove, I started another blog, and I felt like I wanted to talk about my relationship with work and the design industry. And one day I was just mad with clients and the whole service industry thing, and I wrote this rant basically called "How to Stop Being a Graphic Designer." And I was just mad, like, fuck, I hate this, being designer's crap. And I'd never really written anything like that before. And it seemed to struck a chord with people. And even though what I wrote was quite naive and not really that well thought through, I realized that there is not many safe places where you can go and talk about your feelings about your job, especially as a designer. The work that you do is celebrated and the process, but a lot of the time the aspect of self-care is not really covered anywhere online. So my blog has become a way for me to explore that. And what I found is that people were Googling things like how to stop being a graphic designer, or I hate being a graphic designer, or what happens to old graphic designers, which is a really good question. I think my answer to that is if you've seen the film Logan's Run, where there's this dystopian society, and basically anyone over the age of 30 is eliminated. I don't know where the old graphic designers go, but if you're out there, send me an email because I would like to speak to you. So over time, I've seen some patterns emerge in these stories that people tell me, and there's kind of a sliding scale, and I've given this the moniker the tired, mired, and expired pattern. So if you're tired, it's generally just that you've lost a sense of energy, and your batteries are drained, and you need to recharge yourself, and that's easier to fix. And then the next step down is mired, and that's where you've started to lose a sense of purpose in what you do, and you're questioning how you got into this creative life in the first place. And that's obviously a bit harder to deal with. And then if you've got both of those things happening, so you've lost your energy and you've lost your sense of purpose, then you start to get to the bottom, which is the expired phase, and that's a horrible place to be. And what I wanted to talk about was some ways to fix these things. I don't know if you've heard of a book called How to Be a Graphic Designer Without Losing Your Soul by Adrian Shaughnessy, but this has become a kind of blueprint for me. And I think whilst it's a great book about the business side of being a designer and running a studio, it doesn't actually cover your soul, and it doesn't give you any ideas for self-care. So I've started writing about these in my blog. And it's such a tricky question because how do you nurture your soul? It's invisible. You can't see it or touch it or speak to it. And I think the easiest way to describe it is that if your soul's invisible, you need to feed it invisible things. And these are the big words like love and laughter and joy, silence and compassion that sound kind of ridiculous when you say them out loud like that. But that's what your soul is craving. So I want to give you a few ideas for how you could bring a bit more of those things into your life. Love is a tricky one, especially self-love, as hippie-ish as that might sound. I'm not some kind of self-help guru, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. But there's a book, if you Google how to love yourself like your life depends on it, it's by a guy who was also depressed, and he got really, really in a bad way and couldn't leave his house for months. But what he started doing was looking in the mirror and just saying, I love myself. I know that sounds ridiculous, right? Who's going to do that? I'm not going to do it now. But he would do that every day, over and over and again, like a mantra. I love myself. And I've tried this, and I have to say it works. And I think it makes sense, because if you're not willing to love yourself, then how can you expect anyone else to? Laughter is an easier one. You can trick your body with this as well. Your brain releases endorphins when you laugh, whether it's real or a fake laugh. And that's where you get stuff like laughter clubs, where people just meet up to laugh, and you don't. You can just laugh, and you don't it makes you feel better. Just that, the muscle reaction releases those endorphins. So that's an easy body hack. Joy as well is something that's really intangible, and I think that boils down to doing stuff for the hell of it. As a creative person, you're often doing the creative things for other people, and you need to remember to do that stuff for yourself. But I think it also has to happen outside of work. So for me, that means things like going for a bike ride with no purpose or end goal at all. Or also I've started making music for fun. I was in a really bad band last year, and we were pretty terrible, and we had no ambitions to ever, give a gig. But just doing that 2 or 3 hours of music really kind of took me into a different zone, and it was creativity for the sake of it, and without having to worry about deadlines or clients or outcomes. Silence. This is a big one. And because of the pace of modern life, I think it's getting more and more important to seek out silence in our lives. And there's 2 ways I've started to do this. One is by meditating. I don't do this in any kind of spiritual way. When I say meditating, I just mean closing your eyes, focusing on your breathing for a few minutes, and then starting to pay attention to the thoughts in your head. There's loads of apps and guided meditation tapes you can get these days. And I think it's becoming more accessible. And it's one of those things that when you get really busy, you feel like you don't have time to do it. And that's the exact time when you do need to actually make the time for it. So one thing that I've started doing is trying to attach that habit of meditation onto other habits I have. So for example, when I open my curtains in the window, that's my trigger to do the meditation. And you can use that hook to add other habits to your life. So say after you brush your teeth every day, you might attach another habit, whether that's meditating or exercising or whatever it might be. And the other thing I've started doing in pursuit of silence is trying to go off the grid. This is hard, as everyone with a mobile phone will know. But you can do this in baby steps. So the first one is just turn your phone off for a few hours for an afternoon, and then see if you can work up to a whole day, right? A whole day without looking at your phone, which is incredibly difficult. But you can also put yourself in situations where your phone doesn't work. And my fix for this is go up to the Highlands where there's crap mobile reception. And I've actually gone as long as 4 days now without using a phone, which is just an amazing feeling because you suddenly just can hear yourself think. And that is something that's just so valuable and so hard to get in our lives these days. And the last thing I think you need to feed your soul is compassion. And by compassion, I also mean self-understanding. And this is really hard to get a sense of that. But as a creative person, I think we have tools at our disposal that other people don't have, like drawing or writing. So you can do things like keep a notepad by your bed, and if you wake up from a crazy dream, you can draw it. And if you do this every day for a week or a month, you'll build up this incredible kind of library of thoughts from inside your head. And you can do that with writing too, of course. Keep a journal. You don't need to share these thoughts online, although that kind of helps as well. But that act of recording your thoughts and making them visible, making them tangible, is so helpful for getting a sense of where you're at and where you want to be. So I would encourage anyone to, if you're thinking about writing, to try and make that a habit as well. And the last one, and this is quite a simple one, is don't be a dick to yourself. And what I mean by that is the voice inside your head that you talk to yourself with. Don't let that guy be your worst enemy. And I think this is something I really struggle with. I think too often I'll be really critical of my actions, or I'll beat myself up about stuff that I haven't done. And you wouldn't want someone like that in your life as a friend, would you? It's not someone you want to have around. So why would you let that voice live inside your head? So I've started making a conscious effort to change that kind of self-talk that I have and to turn that into a positive thing rather than being a dick to myself all the time. And I want to come back to this issue of our mental health and looking after yourself. The easiest fix for this is obviously the hardest fix at the same time, which is to talk about it. My article that I wrote on depression really opened my eyes up to this. And it was only when I kind of went out on a limb and talked about depression in public that the people around me started sharing their stories with me. And I realized that so many people I knew had been through this, but they just never been able to open up about it. So I'm not saying you need to publish a confessional post on Medium and let it forth on the internet. There's enough of those stories out there already. But what I want to urge you to do is to take a little risk and to open up to your circle of friends and family, and to try and share some of the painful stuff that you're going through. And obviously that's going to be a painful thing to do, and it's not easy. But I think if we could all take that risk, there's a chance for us to start changing this, and for mental health to stop being a taboo subject. And I think that is something that is worth taking that risk for. Thank you.